Spanish Fork, Utah, once a place of miles and miles of farmland, with a few homes scattered throughout its borders, is now a growing and thriving community. The history of Spanish Fork is a unique one, born on religious principles like many of the neighboring cities in the Utah Valley. Just months after the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, a group of religious Spanish explorers, led by Francisco Atanasio Dominguez and Silvestre Velez de Escalante, entered into the valley through what is now called Spanish Fork Canyon. This expedition into the valley would then begin the settlement of people in the newly discovered valley. Over the years, people began to settle in Spanish Fork. Houses were built, railways put into place, and businesses emerged as the city of Spanish Fork began to grow. Much has changed in Spanish Fork over the years. It grew from just a few families spread throughout the town to a city now of over 35,000 people. But there is more to Spanish Fork's history than most people know. The roots of Spanish Fork come from much more than a group of Spanish explorers. What makes Spanish Fork so unique and sets it apart from all the surrounding cities is its Icelandic ancestry.
You know, I think we have an inborn yearning to get to know our ancestors. There's just something about that. As we turn our hearts to our ancestors, something significant happens inside of us. We realize that, you know, we're part of something greater than ourselves when we think about our ancestors.
Each person who walks this earth comes from many generations of family, all with their own unique characteristics and stories. Stories of hard work, of service, of diligence, of faith, of trials and tribulation. Those people who came from Iceland are a perfect example of all these characteristics. Their legacy is dedicated to better the lives of their future posterity. The immigration of the Icelanders to Spanish Fork mainly came about due to the desire for religious liberty, and can be tied back to two Icelanders, Thorarin Haflidason and Gudmundur Gudmundsson. These two traveled to Copenhagen, Denmark, to sharpen their skills in their respective trades. While in Denmark, they were contacted by Mormon missionaries, learned of their doctrine, and were baptized into the church. Later, they were called as missionaries to proclaim the gospel in their homeland of Iceland. Though it was very difficult, they were able to have success, especially in the islands south of Iceland called Vestmannaeyjar, or the Westman Islands. At this time, church leaders exhorted many of the church's new converts to gather to Zion, or to gather in Utah. In 1854, the first three Mormon Icelandic pioneers were Samuel Björnsson, his wife Margaret, and their friend Helga Jónsdóttir. They started making their way to Utah, and a short time later, 13 more saints in Iceland would hearken to a call to come to Zion and begin their immigration to the United States.
They had to walk a little farther than many. They had to travel a little farther, I should say. They walked across the plains, but they also came across the ocean. And their circumstances were humble, but they were strong, faithful people.
Pushing the handcarts, my great-grandmother, when she had the baby, the first child on the plane, she got to stay in the wagon 3 days, and then she had to get back out and push the handcarts. They'd go as about 10 to 12 miles a day pushing the hand carts with their stuff in. I don't know how they done it. I don't think I'd have been strong enough to have done what they did.
The trek was indeed treacherous for these first Icelandic immigrants. Many do not realize the trials and hardship that these saints experienced as they trekked almost halfway across the world to settle in a new country.
Boy, we need to show appreciation for what they went through, for our being able to experience such great benefits and such good lives here in this land of liberty. And Iceland is, they have a lot of liberties there too, but it's just not as comfortable a life, I would say. The Icelanders in Iceland today have a comfortable life, but I don't think it compares with what we have and the opportunities we have here.
Upon arrival in Salt Lake, these immigrants were instructed by the LDS Church prophet Brigham Young to settle in Spanish Fork, where they made their permanent home. Though not as treacherous of a journey, many other saints would migrate to Spanish Fork. This started the pattern where almost every Mormon Icelandic immigrant until 1914 settled in Spanish Fork. Nearly 400 of these Icelandic immigrants would make the trek to Spanish Fork. Once there, they would face their new trial of starting life in this new foreign country.
It was a desert with hardly any housing. And what kind of living were these people to have in their new home? They came equipped only with their faith, with their beliefs, with their character, and their willpower. With all of this enabled them to succeed. We are here today to honor them and pay tribute to their legacy and the heritage they have given to all of us.
The struggles of the early Icelandic settlers didn't end once they settled in their new home of Spanish Fork. They found life in a new country was no easy thing. Not only the language differed in this new land, but the culture and the way of living was also different. Many early Icelandic settlers lacked the sufficient provisions to build houses, so they would build what was called dugouts. These dugouts were built right into the ground. They usually didn't have any windows, so the only light they could get was through an open door. These dugouts actually worked out quite well for these settlers, since having a place built into the ground would protect them from the elements and would stay quite warm during the winter seasons.
On the dugouts, one of the reasons that the dugouts were familiar with them because of over in Iceland, so it wasn't new for them to do that or uncommon. Because of being so poor, they didn't have any lumber to begin with to build the home. So and then when they started getting lumber, then the dugouts started to fade from the hillside. And I don't know how many there were there, but there were several that had to do that in order to survive.
Another trial many Icelandic settlers had to deal with was Indians in the valley. In years previous to Dominguez and Escalante discovering what is now Spanish Fork in 1776, Indians had inhabited the land for centuries. So with that being said, these Icelandic settlers had skirmishes with these Indians from time to time.
Well, the years was kind of rough, and they had to work real hard in getting things done here in Spanish Fork. Besides trying to be good to the Indians, about 14 Indians came into my great-great-grandmother's house. And the men had gone out in the fields in Palmyra and around where they got drowned, and 14 Indians came into her house. And she was so scared, she thought she was going to die. But then she thought, well, if I give them everything I have in my cupboards, she said, so she got out flour, sugar, everything she had to give to him. Then the chief of the Indians, he come forward with a pair of scissors, and she thought, oh boy, now I've had it. But he handed her as a gesture for being good to them, but they still was kind of rough, and they went out and tromped her nice garden. She had melons and stuff, but at least she didn't lose her life with him.
One of the distinguishing traits of an Icelander is hard work, and the settlement of just about any city requires tremendous effort. Upon arrival in Utah, of course, these Icelanders didn't have a lot of money, so they needed a way to earn a living. The Icelanders carried with them a couple of trades to the States, mainly fishing and shearing sheep. These early Icelandic settlers' descendants tell of their stories.
My grandfather sheared sheep and worked for farmers and helped them with threshing and the grain and that. My father went to Geneva. Geneva came in, and most of the fellows went to Geneva. Was one of the big industries that we had.
My father died when I was 6 years old and left my mother a widow with 9 children, and she went to work in the hot lunch and worked in the hot lunch until she died. And my grandfather, he had a business of shearing sheep, and he used to gather up all these men, and they would go even clear up into Montana and Canada and shear sheep as a group.
Everybody had a hard time. The times were very, very rough. I remember Gisli Berenson one time telling me that he remembered that a cow had died in one of the fields. And he said the old people would go over there and they would cut the flesh off the old cattle, the cattle that had died, so they could have some meat to eat. So those were some pretty tough times when they first arrived. It's interesting, you get somebody like Gisli Berenson, came here when he was 8 years of age, came from a cold and isolated island where it was only a couple of ways really to make a decent living. He came over here, and with his own initiative and his own strength of character and self-motivation, he became one of the largest ranchers in the whole Spanish Fork area, Utah Valley area. Left a great legacy. But I was thinking that Icelanders that I know of came over here with very few skills, no language, and they became educators and builders, military officers, business leaders, bankers, authors, church leaders, and legislators. And that, for a small group of people, I think is exceptional.
It wasn't all hard work and trials, though, for these newly settled Western Icelanders. Despite their tough circumstances, these Icelanders and their descendants were able to find ways to have fun.
All the Icelanders on the bench was one big family. We didn't know whose aunt was whose, but you called everybody aunt or uncle or somebody. There was just a big, wonderful time of growing up in Spanish Fork.
The winters were much more severe in this area than they are now, I'm sure, but we spent a lot of time in the evening sleigh riding, and we would build a bonfire at the top of the hill and then do a lot of racing down the hill, and we'd go down maybe a block and a half. But it was a fun sport and a fun evening to get together with the guys and do the sleigh riding.
You know, we made our own fun. We didn't have to have little leagues and anything like this. We'd play in the road. We'd play on the church lawn. We would and have I think more fun than they do now.
Among this group of Icelandic immigrants were Lutherans who joined their native countrymen in Utah. Although not of the same faith, this small body of Lutherans joined in with the Icelandic Latter-day Saint community and festivities. Their Icelandic ancestry bound them together, notwithstanding their religious differences. This bind that tied these Icelanders together is really what sets these immigrants apart from all those who have settled in Spanish Fork. The unity that these Icelanders share even continues today, as each generation is very much aware of where they came from and are very proud to be of Icelandic ancestry. Common among the Icelandic people is their custom of telling stories and staying well connected with their relatives and friends. According to Utah historian Kate B. Carter, also of Icelandic descent, the Icelandic people of Utah are said to have preserved the folklore and customs of their mother country more than any other nationality who pioneered to Utah. In fact, Spanish Fork is now the oldest continuous Icelandic settlement in North America. Even today, it is very evident that the Western Icelanders are very proud of where they came from and are able to stay well connected with Iceland. From a very early time, these Western Icelanders would find ways to help preserve their Icelandic heritage. One of the main ways to help them preserve this was the establishment of Iceland Days. The first Iceland Day celebration was held in 1897. Since it was started, it has been held in many different places in Spanish Fork, as well as some surrounding areas.
Iceland Day was always held at Arrowhead, down by Benjamin. There was quite a gathering. I remember there was always a lot of people there, 200 or 300 people. They started out mid-morning and stayed there till late in the afternoon. There was quite a bit of...
Oh, they stayed till 2 in the morning when they got over that dance.
They'd have a dance, they'd have parties, and they'd do a lot of races and a lot of fun games.
I think the tradition, when I lived in Salt Lake City, there was a lady and I was telling her about my Icelandic heritage, and she said, I'm Norwegian, and she said, we used to have Norway Day at Lagoon, but we don't do that anymore. And I think the thing that we have captured this and kept this spirit and the identity of being an Icelander.
What could be called the centerpiece of the preservation of the Icelandic heritage in Spanish Fork was the construction of the Icelandic Monument. In August 1938, the Icelandic Association and the Daughters of Utah Pioneers met to dedicate a lighthouse monument in Spanish Fork to honor the original 16 Icelandic pioneers who came from Iceland.
Without a doubt, the monument, I think, is what has kept it going, because it's an icon that everybody identifies with, and when we talk about with other people, we tell them about it, and it's so visible. But it's a symbol that of the heritage, and therefore that keeps the spirit of the Icelandic bond alive. I think it's that bond that when that happens, it's something to remember it by.
Perhaps the most significant transitional event that strengthened the ties between Iceland and Western Icelanders were the missionary calls that sent the Gesleson family back to Iceland to reopen missionary efforts for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Iceland in 1975. Dozens of other Western Icelanders have been called since, which has again established the Icelandic language and deep friendship between the two countries. Byron T. Gesleson was later given the Order of the Falcon, which is the highest honor given by the Icelandic government to Western Icelanders for contributions that significantly benefited Iceland and its people.
There's only a few people who have ever received that highest honor, and they recognized him for his greatness. that he was willing to come back to his people and share a message of tremendous value to them.
In 1955, Spanish Fork then celebrated its centennial mark of being a city. A large centennial program was held and was said to be the biggest celebration the city had had up to that point. 50 years later, Spanish Fork celebrated its 150th birthday and had its sesquicentennial celebration. The Icelandic monument was rededicated during the celebration and was another factor in helping connect the Western Icelanders back to Iceland. This too could arguably be said to be the biggest event to happen in Spanish Fork City's existence. For the rededication of the monument, Ólafur Ragnar Grimsson, the President of Iceland, as well as the LDS Church Prophet, President Gordon B. Hinckley, came and spoke. The monument from then on became the Icelandic Memorial. With this switch, a few things were added to the memorial. First, the Memorial Wall of Honor was erected, which lists all the Icelandic immigrants who came to Utah between 1854 and 1914. Plaques were also added that tell the history of the immigration of Icelanders. Finally, a rock from the Westman Islands, where the earliest Icelandic immigrants were baptized into the church, was added.
I want to thank my friends here in Spanish Fork and in the Icelandic Association of Utah for everything you have done, for the exhibitions that you have brought to Iceland, for the gatherings that you have created, for the visits you have made, but above all for how you have enabled us in Iceland to share with you in this history, the history of the Icelandic settlement in Utah, which is an integral part of our history in Iceland. And the names that we see on the rock here today remind all of us that we share a great heritage, that we are one family, that we belong to the same community, that although we might live far apart, we are one in spirit, in faith, in heritage, and in vision. That is the tribute that we bring to the brave and courageous people who came here with nothing 150 years ago, but were able to create, through their spirit, a legacy which makes all of us very proud.
When I think about my Icelandic ancestors, I often reflect and think about how my life is so different from theirs. When I go turn up the heat or go turn on the fireplace, I contemplate about how challenging it was for them. We have such a easy, convenient life. And I often ask myself when I'm reflecting, I hope they'll be proud of me when I meet them again someday. I hope they'll say, the sacrifice was worth it because you took our sacrifice and made a good life for your family, and you took advantage of the opportunities that we provided for you by coming to America and making it possible for you to have this life.
I'm very proud to be an Icelander. I've loved growing up on the bench and living and playing with all of these people and reading the histories of my ancestors and the struggles and the hardships that they went through to get here, and we're reaping all the benefits of what they have done for us. I am just very happy to be an Icelander.
I've always been real proud to be an Icelander. When I was a kid, everyone in the neighborhood was Icelandic, and I could go in any house and have a meal or sleep in their bed or anything else. It was just a great big family, and I think we were very blessed to be able to say we're Icelanders and come to this United States?
Well, there's a lot of fond memories of Mom's family, and it's just, you think about it periodically, and you're very blessed to come from the people that sacrificed what they did.
I've always felt that my father, I think, taught me that being of Iceland descent was being of a child of noble birthright. But growing up without a father and with only one sister, I think my heritage was greatly strengthened, and my appreciation for my friends and associates was immeasurably strengthened by the kindness and the goodness that they showed Kay and I as we were growing up. The McKells and the Johnsons and the Berensons and the Olsons and Jamesons and everyone around us were Icelandic, and I never recall an unkind word. I never recall anyone doing anything but building us. I can remember going to church and Munn Gesslison always giving me a great big hug, and it was the only hug I really got all week long. But I'd go so that Munn would give me a hug and say, "Clark, it's so good to see you at church." And I remember Byron Gesslison was our beloved bishop, the one we all remember the best, and he always made us feel like we were really something worthwhile. And that's, to me, is why I'm grateful that I'm an Icelander.
I'm grateful for the uniqueness of being an Icelander. At one of the dear Iceland days, my two daughters were with me. This is about 15 years ago. And I ran into Loyal Jameson, and of course, with not knowing my father's personality, just vague of what I remember him, I ran into Loyal and I said, "Oh, Loyal," he was one of my father's friends. I said, "Tell my daughters about their grandfather." He said, "Oh, he had a golden personality. You always knew when he was in a room." And this is what this heritage, this DNA that we all carry, I think it just surges. I remember going to Iceland the first time and the sweetness and the spirit that was there. And so that's why and my children, my grandchildren, know that they have Icelandic blood in them.
And I have a great love and respect for them to have been able and strong enough to break from the old hard tradition and change their lives, and not only change their lives, but change the location from their what they were so familiar with there in Iceland, and leave there and come to the barren, desert-like western area here in Utah. So yes, I have a great love and appreciation for all they sacrificed that made life so good for their descendants.
It's just amazing to think that our ancestors are part of us. You know, we owe our existence to them. Without them, you know, we wouldn't be here. But even more importantly than that, or equally important, is what they left with us. You know, they're part of us, not only genetically, but many of the traits that we have today, we got from our ancestors. So we can learn so much from our ancestors. As our hearts turn to them, you know, significant things happen inside of us. You know, we gain a love and a respect for them that we didn't have before. And so I'm just so thankful for Gisli Gislason and Steinar Johnson and Sigmundur Gislason and Svensina Aldabjörg Ásnadóttir, my great grandparents and grandparents, and of course for Byron and Melva Gislason, who have created such a legacy of missionary work in the land of my forefathers.
You who have descended from great and faithful forebears, with the blood of the Vikings in your veins, I express my appreciation for your strength and your goodness, your faith and your capacity. From those converts of early days has come a generation numbered in the thousands who are a credit to this nation as they honor the land of their forebears. It is a wonderful thing because it speaks of appreciation and love and respect for those who've gone before.
The Icelandic saga doesn't end here, though. The legacy these Icelanders left is now rooted deep within each Icelandic descendant. We are all who we are because of those who have come before us. Each person who walks this earth comes from many generations of family, all with their own unique characteristics and stories. The attributes of hard work, service, diligence, and faith that the Icelanders brought over will continue through many generations to come.